Have you ever wondered why the most devastating endings are not loud, but quiet? She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't even close the door behind her. She simply left, as if her presence had always been borrowed, as if she was never meant to stay. And somehow, everything in him began to collapse. She said nothing. But in that silence was a weight he could not carry, and a mirror he could no longer avoid. There were no accusations, no final pleadings, no unraveling of what went wrong, only absence. A kind of absence that whispered truths no words ever dared to speak. He once thought he was in control. He thought his indifference was strength. But now, in the echo of her vanishing, he begins to sense a greater force. Not hers, his own, reflected in the space she left behind. Carl Jung once said, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as fate." And perhaps she was not just a lover. Perhaps she was fate, wrapped in softness, cloaked in mystery, arriving not to complete him, but to confront him with all he had refused to face. Now, alone, he begins to ask the question he never thought he would need to ask. What wounds do we carry that only silence can expose? What truth hides in the vanishing of a woman who once said nothing, yet left everything broken? He never truly heard her, not really. He listened through the filter of what he wanted her to be. A dream, a comfort, a soft orbit around his chaos. When she spoke, her words were translated into convenience. When she paused, he filled the silence with assumptions. He loved her, yes, but not as she was, only as the version he believed he deserved. So she learned to say less, and then nothing at all. This silence was not submission. It was an ancient inheritance passed down through the lineage of women who were told that their truth must not disturb the peace of men, that their pain must be repackaged as beauty, their intuition dismissed as irrational. Over time, she began to speak only to herself, in the quiet corners of her mind, where no one interrupted and no one corrected. She was not passive. She was patient. Every moment she held her tongue. She studied. She watched the patterns repeat. How he turned away when she asked for depth. How he tightened when she touched the part of him that was still unfinished. How he needed her more when she needed less. Her withdrawal was not a disappearance, but a descent. She returned inward, to the cave beneath language, where rage became wisdom and grief became clarity. She saw how her softness had been consumed, how her loyalty had been mistaken for duty, how her body became a vessel for projections he never dared place on himself. She didn't leave all at once. No. Women like her never do. They evaporate, one heartbeat at a time, one swallowed truth, one moment of choosing not to correct the lie, until one day, she is no longer there, even if her body still is. He never noticed her leaving, because to notice would require presence, and presence was the one thing he never truly offered her. Yet even in that, she did not curse him. She did not retaliate. She simply turned her silence into a final act, not of revenge, but of liberation. Because when a woman has exhausted every word, every plea, every second chance, what remains is not apathy. It is sacred detachment. And sacred detachment is not cold. It is volcanic stillness. It is a storm that has already passed, leaving behind a landscape that will never be the same. He thought she was the wound, but in truth, she was the bandage that once kept him from seeing how deep the cut had always been. When she left, something cracked. Not just in his routine, not just in his bed or in the spaces they used to share. What cracked was his image, the one he had painted carefully, over years of forgetting himself. She had been a mirror, not a woman, not a lover, not a muse, a mirror that showed him what he refused to see. He tried to move on, to fill the silence with laughter, to replace her reflection with others. But no one mirrored back the same truth. Others praised him, desired him, accepted his surface. She had demanded depth without saying a word. And now, that absence had teeth. It bit into the edges of his self-definition. He began to unravel. In Jungian terms, he entered what is known as an ego collapse. The center he believed was solid began to reveal itself as hollow, because his identity was never truly formed from within. It was patched together through reaction, defense, pride. And she, unknowingly or not, had touched the softest point beneath all that scaffolding. Jung wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. But when the disguise is love, the confrontation feels more like betrayal." He once believed he loved her. But perhaps it wasn't her he loved. Perhaps he loved the version of himself she made him believe he was. When she looked at him, he felt complete. Not because he was, but because she filled in what he could not face. And when she withdrew, it wasn't love that left. It was illusion. He began to dream of her, not in flesh, but in fragments. Her voice from another room, her back turning as he reached, her eyes steady and unafraid. Not angry, not forgiving, just there. A presence that demanded him to meet the part of himself he always avoided. This is the cost of projecting the soul onto another. When they leave, they take your reflection with them. He no longer knew who he was without her witness, without her gaze, without her silence. He stood in front of his own shadow, and for the first time, it did not look away. She is not a woman, not in the way the world measures one. She is an image, a presence, an ancient echo. You do not see her enter, but you feel when something inside you begins to shift. She is not loud. She does not announce herself. She arrives in the pauses between words, in the discomfort that grows when you realize someone sees through everything you pretend to be. She is not here to soothe you. She is here to strip you, to strip the story you told yourself about love, about control, about who you are and who you were never brave enough to become. In mythology, she appears under many names. Lilith, the first woman who would not bow. Kali, the goddess who dances on the ashes of what must be destroyed. Medusa, whose gaze turned false heroes to stone not because she was evil, but because they came to conquer what they should have come to understand. She sits still. Yes, but around her, everything decays that is not true. Jung called her the shadow feminine, not because she is dark, but because she holds everything a man casts out of his own light, his vulnerability, his hunger for meaning, his helplessness, his yearning to surrender without losing power. All of it, all that he denies, she carries. She doesn't speak often. She doesn't need to. Her silence is a language older than words, a gaze, a stillness, a presence that says, I am not here to perform. I am not here to heal you. I am here to be what you cannot yet name. Men fear her not because she is cruel, but because she is real. She is the part of their psyche that remembers, the part that never forgot what it feels like to be whole. She does not destroy with violence. She destroys with reality. And reality, when you have lived in illusion too long, feels like death. There came a moment when she stopped explaining, not because she gave up, but because she woke up. She no longer felt the need to be understood by those who had never tried to understand themselves. She no longer twisted her voice into shapes that would fit inside someone else's silence. She no longer offered softness as a bridge to those who only crossed it to conquer. There is a quiet evolution in a woman who once begged to be heard and now chooses not to speak. She remembered something ancient, a truth stored in her marrow, not taught but inherited, that her power was never in persuasion. It was in presence, and presence does not ask for permission. He did not know this version of her. He had memorized her apologies, her need, her longing to belong. But now, she belonged to herself. The love she once gave freely had become something sacred, not withheld in bitterness, but guarded in reverence. She no longer needed to prove that she could love purely. She had, and it had not been received. So now, she loved differently. She loved through boundaries, through absence, through not showing up where she was once taken for granted, through choosing herself in every space where she used to disappear. This was not revenge. It was return, a return to a center that had waited for her behind every compromise, a return to the truth that her worth was not a negotiation. She no longer sought to rescue the drowning. She had learned that some people build their homes underwater and call it depth. Instead, she built a home inside her own breath, inside stillness, inside knowing. The world called her detached, cold, selfish. But she was none of these. She was simply done explaining the storm to those who only felt the wind. In the days after she was gone, the world did not change. The city moved the same way. The sky kept its color. But inside him, the architecture trembled. He thought it was just grief, but grief has a center. This was centerless. It was not sadness. It was disorientation. He reached for himself and found no edges, as if someone had rearranged the mirrors in the house, and every reflection now betrayed him. She did not haunt him like a ghost. Ghosts moan. She was quieter. She returned in glances from strangers that reminded him of her gaze, in the way a certain song now tasted bitter, in the mirror, where his face looked slightly unfamiliar, as if she had taken the part of him that felt known. Sleep became a negotiation. He began to dream in fragments, not of her body, but of the silence she left behind, of doors open but never closed, of her standing still while everything around her moved. No one else seemed to notice the crater. Friends told him he looked fine. New women laughed at his charm, but nothing stuck. Their touch felt like surface. Their words echoed without meaning. She had taken nothing. But in doing so, she had taken everything. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." He began to wonder, had she been fate not a punishment, not a lesson, but a mirror that demanded he see the part of himself he had always outsourced? She had not left as someone to forget. She had left as someone who revealed. Now, In the absence of her voice, he heard his own, and it sounded small. It sounded unsure. It sounded like someone who had lived decades without listening. He started noticing the patterns, the ways he deflected, the moments he shut down when touched too deeply, the cruel ease with which he minimized others to protect himself. She had not named these things. She had only stopped participating in them. And that was the wound. Not the leaving, but the clarity it forced. He searched for someone to blame, for a reason that would allow him to remain intact. But there was none. She had not screamed. She had not betrayed. She had not left in flames or fury. She had simply stopped saving him. And that, he realized, was what undid him. She had been his shelter, not in the way of comfort, but in the way of reflection. She had shown him the parts of himself he never dared approach. Her silence had not punished him. It had revealed him. She never wanted to ruin him. She wanted him to see. But not every man can look into a mirror and recognize the shape staring back. She was not the villain in his story. She was the moment the story paused and asked, "What are you doing with your life?" There was no revenge in her leaving, no calculation. She did not want him to suffer. She wanted to stop suffering. In truth, she had been trying to leave for a long time. Not physically, but energetically. Every time her truth was dismissed, a thread snapped. Every time her presence was consumed but not cherished, a layer vanished. And when the last thread broke, there was no drama, just distance. People assumed she was cruel, that only a heartless woman could disappear so completely. But only those who have stayed too long in noise know the power of silence. She was not a storm, she was the eye of it. In her stillness, she exposed the trembling of everything around her. And now, he lives with that stillness. It does not scream at him. It does not chase him. It simply exists, like a pulse he cannot escape, a knowing he cannot unknow. He cannot speak about her, not truly, because to speak of her is to admit that someone once saw him in ways he never saw himself. And no man forgets the woman who mirrored his shadow and did not flinch. If you have ever been the woman who vanished without noise, you already know this truth. Sometimes, silence is not the absence of love. It is the final shape of it. You tried. You stayed. You listened until your own voice became an echo. You offered presence, warmth, and understanding. Even when none of it returned to you, you carried the weight of words that never found a home, hoping that stillness might teach him what your voice could not. And when it didn't, you left, not to hurt him, not to make a point, but because the part of you that still remembered your worth finally stood up and whispered, "This is enough." If you have ever sat with that kind of ache, the kind that comes from loving someone who could not meet you, then perhaps you understand what it means to become the mirror and then to remove it. Not to shatter him, but to offer him a chance to see himself clearly, perhaps for the first time. Somewhere, he still feels you, not as a wound, not even as guilt, but as a quiet echo that shaped who he is now. A presence that left a question he cannot yet answer, a memory that no new love has managed to overwrite. And you walk forward, not with a shield, not with anger, but with a calm that was earned. You walk differently now, not in reaction, but in remembrance. You no longer ask to be seen. You have become the one who sees. If something inside you stirred while hearing this, a memory or a wound or a quiet truth you had forgotten, then this space was created for you. This story is your language. This mirror also belongs to you. Send this to the women who still believe that silence makes them small. To the ones who have not yet discovered that absence can hold more power than presence. To the women who are learning that leaving does not mean defeat. Sometimes it is the first moment of return. And if you have not yet joined this space, subscribe, not because someone told you to, but because you recognize the voice beneath the words, the one that does not perform, the one that lives in the quiet places, the one that speaks when the world finally goes still. Because the women who say nothing are often the ones who leave the deepest marks, not on a man, but on the shape of truth itself.